The phone rang at 3 a.m. on New Year's Day, 1981. The 911 dispatcher picked up, expecting the usual drunk driving call or party gone wrong. Instead, she heard something that made her blood run cold. A man was sobbing into the phone, his voice high-pitched and barely coherent. "There's a girl hurt there," he managed to say between gasps. "Behind the manufacturing plant. She needs help." The dispatcher tried to get more information, tried to ask who he was, what happened, but the line went dead. The man had hung up and disappeared into the freezing Minnesota night. Officers rushed to the Malmberg Manufacturing Company near Pierce Butler Road in St. Paul. What they found in the snow would haunt them for years. 20-year-old Karen Potack lay naked in a snowbank near the railroad tracks, her skull cracked open from repeated blows with a tire iron. Her brain was exposed. The temperature hovered near zero. Somehow, impossibly, she was still alive. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital where doctors worked frantically to save her life. Karen would survive, but the attack left her with permanent brain damage and no memory of what happened that night. But before we get into today's story, if you love true crime mysteries with bizarre psychological twists, then you're in the right place, because that's exactly what we cover here. And I upload new stories 3 to 4 times every week. So if that interests you, please gently tap the like button and subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future uploads. All right, let's get into today's story, which takes place in Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota in the early 1980s. Investigators had almost nothing to work with. No witnesses, no murder weapon recovered, no clear motive. Karen couldn't identify her attacker. There was no sexual assault, no robbery, just brutal, senseless violence. But they did have that phone call. Detectives listened to the recording over and over, trying to make sense of it. The voice was strange, artificially high-pitched, trembling with what sounded like genuine emotion. The man was crying as he directed them to his own victim. It didn't make sense. Was this the attacker calling in his own crime? Or some sick witness playing games? They released the audio to local media, hoping someone would recognize the voice. No one came forward. 5 months passed. St. Paul police began to wonder if Karen's attack was an isolated incident. Then, on June 3, 1981, the phone rang again. The same voice, the same desperate sobbing. "God damn, will you find me?" the man cried into the phone. "I just stabbed somebody with an ice pick. I can't stop myself. I keep killing somebody." The line went dead before dispatchers could trace the call. Hours later, teenagers playing near a freeway construction site in St. Paul made a horrifying discovery. 18-year-old Kimberly Compton lay in a field, her body covered in stab wounds. Investigators counted 61 puncture marks from an ice pick, exactly as the caller had described. A shoelace was wrapped around her neck. Kimberly was a student from Peepin, Wisconsin, just visiting the Twin Cities. She had gotten off a bus, and within hours, she was dead. The killer had struck again, and once again, he had called to confess. But he wasn't done calling. 2 days later, the weeping voice returned. "I'm sorry for what I did to Compton," the man sobbed. "I'll turn myself in." Investigators waited. He never came. On June 6th, he called again, this time to correct details in newspaper reports about the murders. On June 11th, another call. In a whimpering, barely coherent voice, he cried, "I'm sorry for what I did to Compton." Each call came from a different payphone scattered across the Twin Cities. Police dubbed him the Weepy-Voiced Killer. The pattern was becoming clear, and it was unlike anything investigators had seen before. This wasn't a killer taunting police or boasting about his crimes. This was someone who seemed genuinely tormented by what he was doing, begging to be caught, claiming he couldn't control himself. One caller even said, "If somebody dies with a red shirt on, it's me." Detectives noticed something else. Both Karen and Kimberly had been wearing red clothing when they were attacked. Was that his trigger? Reporter Caroline Lowe from WCCO-TV had been covering the case from the beginning. She approached the police chief with an idea. "Let me broadcast the audio," she said. "The voice is so distinctive. Someone out there has to recognize it." The police agreed. Soon, the Weepy-Voiced Killer's confessions were playing on television sets across Minnesota. A dedicated tip line was set up. Hundreds of calls poured in, but none led anywhere. The voice remained unidentified. 14 months passed. Then, on July 21, 1982, 33-year-old Kathleen Greening was found dead in her bathtub in Roseville, just outside St. Paul. She had been drowned. At first, police ruled it an accidental drowning. The scene was different from the other attacks. Less violent, more controlled. And this time, there was no phone call. Investigators didn't connect Kathleen's death to the Weepy-Voiced Killer. That would turn out to be a mistake. 2 weeks later, on the night of August 5th, 40-year-old Barbara Simons went to the Hexagon Bar in Minneapolis after finishing her shift as a nurse. She was tired, just wanted to relax with a drink before heading home. A man approached her and asked for a cigarette. She gave him one. They spent the evening talking, and when Barbara was ready to leave, the man offered her a ride home. She told the waitress as they left, "He's cute. I hope he's nice, since he's giving me a ride home." Those were the last words anyone heard Barbara Simons say. The next morning, a paperboy on his route along the Mississippi River made a discovery that would become one of the most brutal crime scenes in Twin Cities history. Barbara's body lay on the riverbank. Investigators counted over 100 stab wounds covering her body. The attack had been frenzied, savage. This killer was escalating. 2 days later, the phone rang again. "Please don't talk. Just listen," the familiar weeping voice said. "I'm sorry I killed that girl. I stabbed her 40 times. Kimberly Compton was the first one over in St. Paul. I don't know what is the matter with me. I'm sick." Police now had a confirmed connection between at least 2 murders, and they knew they were hunting a serial killer. But who was he? The bartender at the Hexagon Bar remembered the man who left with Barbara. He gave detectives a description. White male, late 30s, around 6 feet tall, dark hair, dark eyes. Police combed through their records, focusing on men who fit that description and had previous assault charges. They assembled a photo lineup of 8 suspects and showed it to the bar staff. The waitress pointed to one photo immediately. "That's him," she said. 37-year-old Michael Stephani. Police finally had a name, but they didn't have enough evidence to make an arrest. They needed to catch him in the act, or they needed him to make a mistake. On August 21, 1982, just 2 weeks after Barbara's murder, Paul picked up his next victim. Denise Williams was a 19-year-old sex worker on Hennepin Avenue in Minneapolis. Paul offered her $100 for her time. She agreed and got into his car. But as they drove, Denise's instincts started screaming. He wasn't taking her where he said he would. The route was wrong. They were heading into a dark, suburban area instead of back toward the city. When Paul pulled over and grabbed a screwdriver, Denise didn't freeze. She fought back. As Paul lunged at her with the screwdriver, stabbing repeatedly, Denise grabbed a glass bottle and smashed it over his head with everything she had. The bottle shattered. Blood poured down Paul's face. He stumbled backward, and Denise ran, screaming, into the night. A neighbor heard her screams and came running. He saw Paul trying to stab Denise again and tackled him. Paul fled into the darkness, but he was badly injured. Back at his apartment, Paul realized the head wound was serious. He was bleeding heavily and couldn't stop it. He had no choice. He called 911 for medical help. When the dispatcher answered, she immediately recognized the voice. Officers were waiting when the ambulance arrived. Detective Mike Brown interviewed Paul at the hospital, and when Brown showed him photos of the victims, something happened. Paul jumped up from his seat, and his voice changed, shooting up into that distinctive high pitch. "You're not going to pin those on me," he said. Detective Brown froze. That was it. That was the voice from the recordings. After 18 months of phone calls and confessions, they finally had him. Paul was charged with the attempted murder of Denise Williams and the murder of Barbara Simons. He pleaded not guilty. At trial, his ex-wife, his sister, and a woman who had lived with him all testified, saying they recognized his voice on the recordings. The voice was unmistakable, they said. Paul was convicted on both counts and sentenced to 18 years for the attack on Williams and 40 years for Barbara's murder. He maintained his innocence. Even though he called and confessed and told people where to find these victims, reporter Caroline Lowe later said, he always denied he had committed the crimes. 15 years passed. In December 1997, Paul was diagnosed with melanoma. Doctors gave him less than a year to live. Facing death, Paul made a decision. He contacted police with an offer. He would confess to everything if they would send him one thing: a photograph of his mother's headstone. They agreed. Paul confessed to attacking Karen Potack on New Year's Eve 1980. He confessed to murdering Kimberly Compton in 1981. He confessed to murdering Barbara Simons in 1982. And then he told them about a murder they hadn't connected to him at all: Kathleen Greening. He had drowned her in her bathtub in July 1982, he said. Investigators pulled Greening's address book from evidence. There, among the names, they found Paul S. with his phone number. The murder that seemed different, the one with no phone call, had been his all along. In interviews, Paul gave few answers about why he did it. He claimed there was a voice in his head that told him, "Paul, it's time to kill." He said after one of the murders, he went to a Catholic church and sat in the back pew and cried. "Mother always told me," he said, "if something hurts you, go to God." Paul Michael Stephani died in Oak Park Heights Prison on June 12, 1998, less than a year after his confession. The Weepy-Voiced Killer case remains one of the most psychologically complex in criminal history. A man who murdered with savage brutality, who stabbed his victims dozens of times, who couldn't stop himself from killing, and yet who called police after each attack, begging them to find him, sobbing into payphones at 3 a.m., desperate to be stopped. Was his remorse genuine? Was he truly unable to control his violent urges? Or were the phone calls just another layer of manipulation, a way to insert himself into the investigation and relive his crimes? We'll never know for certain. What we do know is that 3 women are dead, 2 others barely survived, and for 18 months, the Twin Cities lived in fear of a killer who announced his crimes but couldn't be caught. Until one brave woman fought back and ended his reign of terror. If you found this case as disturbing and fascinating as I did, I've got another serial killer case with a bizarre psychological twist you need to see. Click the video on your screen right now about the killer who kept a detailed diary of his torture methods. And if you haven't already, Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories like this. Thanks for watching. Until next time, see ya.